I want to say thank you a lot for coming to the middle of the series on blockchain. And we're recording this session for the benefit of others that haven't been able to participate today. And thanks, Nate, for coming. Session 4 of 7, you're on.
Thank you very much. And thanks to everyone again. I think looks like everyone here has definitely been to at least one other. So thanks, guys, for staying with us. I hope these are getting more interesting as we go.
Yeah, just for some stats, Nate. We've had 27 people on average in each session, and on average 3 sessions. So there are lots of repeats.
Right. Awesome. Okay. Looks like we're sharing. So again, quick recap of our schedule. Here we are on Thursday, session 4. Next week, we'll finish up. On Monday, we're going to talk about cryptocurrencies and some basic economic principles, both outside of blockchain and that apply to blockchain networks. I'm going to leave you Monday with a little bit of a challenge, a little bit of a critical thinking homework assignment. And on Wednesday, we're actually going to take the ideas you come up with and analyze them as a group, which is going to be fun and challenging, Karen. And then on Thursday, we'll talk about the Kevlar project, which you guys have gotten some hints for already, and I'm not gonna give you any more right now. So let's do a quick recap. We have kind of 4 principles that we've covered so far, and I know I went into these a little bit yesterday, so I'm not going to go too deep, just remembering that we talked about fundamentals of innovation and how new solutions and new ways of doing things are kind of an essential or a fundamental piece of great technology solutions. We talked about the fundamentals of blockchain, how we can assess an idea or a business's fit within a blockchain. And then we looked at some noteworthy use cases last class, like Bitcoin, Ethereum, exchanges. And then we looked at some anticipated use cases, like digital identity and art authentication, like we just talked about. So again, I'm not gonna go into anything here. I'm not gonna call on anyone. But let's get into today. Today we're talking about blockchain governance. And I know I say blockchain governance here, but we're actually going to cover 2 topics. The first being governance in the real world, governance that we experience every day, and how blockchain applies to that. But then we're also going to talk about the actual governance of a blockchain system and what that entails. So I hope by this point you kind of understand one thing. Actually, I'm not going to change that yet, which is blockchains are ledgers or databases that are immutable, and that makes them extremely secure and eliminates the need for trusted intermediaries in most processes. So just remember what blockchain does in that basic principle of blockchain as we talk about governance in the real world. So let me ask you this. What types of governance do we experience every day? And just to be clear, when I'm talking about governance here, I'm talking about governance in the process where elements or people in a society wield power or influence or authority, and the policies or the decisions they take concerning everyday life, you and me.
Would making people put their first and last name on their sign-in qualify?
Sure. That could be considered a form of institutional governance. Karen, you're an authority figure at a university, or you are enacting policies to our students. Absolutely. Regulatory obligations.
Yeah.
So what type of governance system would you typically see regulatory obligations, Neil? Or there isn't only one. There are actually many. Authoritarianism would be a good one, Meyer.
And we're a small group, Neil, so I'll let you use the mic.
I turned my mic off just because I was doing good. Intercompany transactions, so obviously cryptocurrency and things like that, the regulatory obligations are different than if you were trying to transfer physical money.
Sure.
So different governments would hold different regulatory issues on the amounts you could trade. So things like that. That's my on regulatory.
Okay, so we're talking about regulations as they apply to economic systems. But what about the actual?
Well, let's bear in mind that governance is the creation of those regulations and the enforcement of them.
Right. So what about the processes that enact or create those regulations, Neil? We could look at something like a monarchy would be an example of that type of governance process, right? Democracy would be another one. But there are also less popular ones, right? Fascism is an example of a means of enacting and putting into place policies that govern people and govern processes. Theocracy, definitely. This is a reasonably comprehensive list of the prevalent forms of governance that we see. There are elections, obviously, which is a characteristic of a representative democracy. Representative democracy being a system in which where we vote for people to make decisions for us, decisions inevitably about policies or regulations. We have a dictatorship where one person makes the decisions. An oligarchy, similar to a dictatorship where we have a small group of people. Right, perfect, Fateh. We have fascism where corporations run things. Corporations govern those policies and regulations. Monarchy, again, similar to a dictatorship, but we have an electoral process involved in a monarchy. Tribal governance is an interesting one. There is a means of governance if we could look at a tribal community or an indigenous culture. And that tribal governance kind of points us to the idea of meritocracy. Does anyone have an idea of what a meritocratic governance system would be?
Unions.
Unions, that's an interesting take.
Like seniority of, no? What did Faith
So
just say?
Fateh just hit it on the head. So a meritocracy is a governance system where only the qualified people get to vote. For example, people in finance wouldn't vote on things about the creative arts. Artists wouldn't vote on financial policy. And as Fatty says, it's where the most suitable people for the job are placed into that role and given the power to vote towards a decision. Now, we also have corporate governance. Corporate governance is what Neil was alluding to, and this is a corporate governance could take the form of a dictatorship. It could take the form of a pure and liquid democracy where we have voting control and we give voting power to members of the corporation. And that can differ whether we're a publicly traded corporation or a private one. There are different, I guess, fundamental rules and practices that differ between public and private companies. Now, this is a lot, obviously, and I hope that most of these are familiar to you guys. And kind of the thing that I want to point out here is that what would we call a model where technology rules? That's a good question, Fateh. Well, we're going to get to that.
We would call it a dictatorship run by an AI.
Good one. So the point I want to make is that
one of the things,
sorry,
Nate, one of the suggestions when we're on the video, if you repeat what's written for the benefit of the people who are listening to the audio afterwards.
Sure. Do you mean just running through these?
Well, as you go along in the future for the rest of the session.
Sure. Of course.
Yeah. The assumption is not everyone is reading the discussion thread.
That's right, and certainly the people who are listening to the videos aren't able to see them.
The discussion thread. Gotcha. Okay. Cool. No problem. So the point I wanted to make here is that just like when we looked at decentralized and centralized systems, there are pros and cons to each. And not any single one of these governance methods is the ipso facto best way of doing things. Let me give you an example. Even dictatorship, probably think of something along the lines of this: China, Nazi Germany. But can anyone think of a dictatorship governance system that was effective?
One could argue China.
Yeah.
Anyone have any other ideas? Priyanka, can you think of one?
Think outside of countries.
In terms of corporations and organizations, Fatima, you must know.
You're going to all shake your heads when the next slide comes up.
It's going to be too obvious.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I got to go check the slides.
No cheating, no cheating.
Oh my God.
She checked the slides.
I did.
I'm going to show you. I know you're still thinking, Priyanka. But what about these three guys? Steve Jobs, when he was still around, was the effective dictator of Apple. Same with Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook. Same with Elon Musk and Tesla. And when we look at a dictatorship in the context of a corporation, really the definition of a dictatorship is any single one person who has board or voting control of the company. And that was the case with each of these. But
that's 51%.
It is, right, except for Jobs. So the interesting thing that we look at in these three examples is that when we have a dictator who is intelligent, who has the interests of the people they're serving or catering to in mind, and who basically has the ability to get things done, to be an effective leader and manager, we can see good results. So I just hope this proves an example to you that even something we look at as a dictatorship, that's something that if applied and designed properly and followed properly, can have positive results.
You're missing one person from that picture. Your current president.
Let's not go there.
Just wants that. Yeah, let's not talk about it. Yeah.
So moving on, not getting into that political topic. Let's look at democratic processes. Good segue. And when we look at any democratic process in the real world, and we remember what a blockchain can do, we can really come to understand that a blockchain can add value to pretty much any voting process. Everything that requires voting is more effective with a blockchain because it proves the legitimacy and the authenticity of every single vote. Now, the interesting thing beyond that is that when we have a blockchain, it enables really a new type of voting-based governance that hasn't been feasible before. The concept has existed, but it hasn't been possible, and we call that liquid democracy. And the idea of liquid democracy is that when an issue comes up, everyone who is impacted by a decision votes on it. Similar to the concept of a meritocracy, but it is more broad in the sense that there's no delegation in a liquid democracy. Everyone who is directly affected participates in the decision-making process. And if we try to imagine that in a world without a blockchain system, it's just not feasible. How do we get 130 million Americans to go to a voting booth once a week? Hard enough to do it every couple years. And if we don't want to deal with that logistical nightmare, how do we get them to vote from their phone, from their couch, securely? And when we had centralized processes, that wasn't possible. But now that we have the presence of a blockchain, a decentralized, immutable database with no centralized control, and that's extremely hard to hack, we have the opportunity to introduce more direct forms of democracy. and that's pretty exciting. Now, the one thing that I want to point out here just before we move on is that when we have a liquid democracy, the people, the representatives that used to be present in a representative democracy, their job shifts. It shifts from being the ones who make the decisions, and their job changes to simply carrying out the decisions made by the people. So we still have the role of, we call it the representative in a liquid democracy. It's just their job changes. Now, given this concept of more opportunity to engage a community in decision-making processes, what other types of governance are possible that aren't feasible right now? Or that you didn't believe to be feasible until we just talked about this concept? What other ways could we engage communities or populations in decisions that we couldn't before we had a blockchain?
Badging.
What do you mean by badging?
Meritocracy. The more badges you have.
So recording performance and experience in an immutable way.
Yeah.
It's a good one. Eliminates people from faking merit. What do you mean by credit-based, Fateh? Where your reputation determines your role in rank.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But that's a great one. And again, we can look at China here. China has a credit-based form of social governance. In China, if you cross the street and jaywalk, you will have your social credit score knocked for breaking the rules. And that's pretty scary to think of, and that may be an inappropriate, out of context example, but it shows us that we need to design these systems well. But yeah, a credit-based governance system is a great solution or idea.
The problem that we would come up against in that particular example is that the Chinese government sets the laws without the input of the people, and then effectively is using the people to enforce it. Because the way the social credit system works is cops don't have to catch you jaywalking. Anybody can catch you jaywalking and ding you because of it.
Mm.
Right.
Which is great for enforcement, but not so good on the lawmaking side of things. Although if one asked the question of all the Chinese people, should we make jaywalking an antisocial behavior, I think the vote would go towards yes.
Right.
So in effect, one could argue that that's actually a good thing, even though we see it as an invasion of our right to choose. Joining society immediately limits your ability to choose by the very nature of you joining a society. And you accept that as a trade-off for joining the society and having the benefits of it.
Interesting.
Interesting. Uh-huh.
That's like all those cult things too, though, right?
How do you mean, Karen?
Like
I don't think we get into cults until tomorrow, do we, Nate?
Oh.
Monday, but I know.
Okay.
We're gonna get into the belief systems on Monday, Karen. Just
Okay.
you wait. So yeah, credit-based systems, great idea, and really, social liberties are important. We agree, Fateh. And the point I want to make here,
but I was just going to say to Fateh,
yeah,
but so are social norms.
True.
And where does the right of an individual compare to the right of everybody?
But also, don't make the assumption that every single one person wants to dictate their own liberties. Right. I think, Mark, you're kind of getting at the point. It's convenient and easy to follow what everyone else is doing. What everyone else is doing just needs to be the right way of doing things. So the point here we're making is that blockchains can add significant value to real-world governance systems. And blockchain is really the ideal platform for governance because its immutability means that each vote is digitally signed. There's no way to double a vote or skew a vote. There's no way. So this is kind of blockchain's applicability to real-world governance. And now I want to shift into governance of blockchain systems themselves. So why do we think that governance is important in blockchain? I'm going to pick someone today. Wanya, I know that you are studying software to a certain extent. Do you have any idea of why governance might be important to a blockchain? Because we'd have some messages in here. Okay. Governance determines the benchmarks for the agreements. Which agreements, Fete? What do you mean by agreements?
Is that the agreements on the transactions that you talked about in one of the earlier sessions?
So if we're talking about consensus, you're exactly right. So those rules that govern how transactions are settled, what rules those transactions need to follow, that is determined by governance. And the other piece of governance is blockchain is software. Software by its very nature is malleable and changeable. It needs to be updated and repaired and adapted as people use it and as the people who built it learn more about the ways it's being used in the real world. And the way blockchain is updated is by developers changing and updating the code. But when you have people depending on a piece of software system that aren't the developers, we need to make sure that the changes that the developers are made are in the best interests of the community using it. So the community who uses the chain should really play a role in how it's changed and when. And that kind of draws on the social credit system concept we just talked about. The community had no role in determining the rules of governance for the system. It's the same principle here. Now, these updates could be things like our users are transacting a lot with the US dollar. We could need to add a compatibility for another currency or another network that needs to be interoperable. We could need to update our consensus algorithms. We could find that there's a better and more efficient way that we can confirm transactions that lets us process more of them. And these are all things that require effective governance. We can't just have an administrator like in a centralized system, because then that administrator has no incentive or motivation to understand the needs and expectations of the users. So because we have this blockchain system that serves governance processes that also requires governance of itself, it makes sense that the voting mechanism of blockchain that's inherent should also be used to govern the system itself. So some current types of blockchain governance that we see today. There are three big ones. There are kind of subcategories of each of these, and we'll touch on a few of those as we go. First, we're going to start with off-chain governance, because that was the first type of governance, blockchain-based governance that we saw in Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a great example of decentralized off-chain governance. And the primary means of voting in Bitcoin's community, that is voting for new software upgrades, is accomplished by nodes. Remember, nodes are the systems, the computers that are hosting the blockchain's infrastructure, that are participating in confirming transactions. Voting in Bitcoin's community is accomplished by nodes simply choosing whether or not to upgrade the new piece of software. Now, the software update will be developed in collaboration with users, with developers, with nodes themselves, but the actual voting process for updating that is accomplished by nodes simply choosing, do I want to use that new software, or do I not agree with those new rules, and do I want to stick with the current way of doing things? And this is what leads to what we call a fork in a blockchain. If a network is updated and 30% of the nodes choose to go with the new software, and 70% choose to stay with the rules of the current system, we basically get two separate blockchains, because each of those cohorts are only going to confirm the transactions and be participating in the network of the software they're running. And this is a pretty good diagram of how that looks in the context of blocks themselves. Following the old rules, new rules are introduced. Nodes individually make the decision which direction they want to go, simply by choosing whether or not to upgrade the software. And this is what we call implied voting. Nodes aren't casting a vote saying yes or no, but the action that they're taking is a means of voting that we call implied voting. Because once those decisions happen, we now have an implied proposal. And that proposal is for users to choose. What about the users of a Bitcoin network? They now have to decide, am I going to go with the old way of doing things or the new way of doing things? So all of this governance in a blockchain, when we're changing rules and updating things, is all based on proposals and decisions. And in blockchain's case, those are all implied decisions. So this is what Bitcoin has looked like. These are all the times that Bitcoin has been forked since its inception. And it's quite a bit. And that's not something that you would expect when you think of Bitcoin as a currency. You wouldn't expect to see all of these sub-communities following their own belief systems and following different sets of rules, but that's just how communities work. Now, Ethereum follows the same type of governance. This is a map of Ethereum's fork evolution, you could call it. Ethereum is a little fancier. You can see that they name their forks. And so Ethereum has the same type of off-chain decentralized governance as Bitcoin. For now, Ethereum is actually planning on moving to proof of stake, moving away from the proof of work consensus that we talked about last week. And when Ethereum moves to proof of stake governance, proof of stake enables on-chain governance. Now, why does it do that? Because proof of stake was a consensus protocol that came about from observing Bitcoin and Ethereum. And it was an attempt to improve the inefficiencies of, or the drawbacks of, the way Bitcoin and Ethereum have been doing it since they started. So most proof of stake networks use on-chain governance. Like I said, there are lots of different variations, but looking at a general case, we can say that proof of stake is a much more sophisticated protocol that came about later on than the off-chain governance that we just looked at. And on-chain governance, this is a pretty good diagram of what we're talking about, is simply a process in which the network participants, usually the nodes or the validators, or sometimes the clients, the users, vote on decisions using coin voting. And decisions are made automatically based on the response to coin votes. Now, if we remember back to the proof of stake consensus protocol, that was a meritocratic form of governance. Can anyone tell me what the merit of a proof of stake governance system is? What experience or credibility do you need to prove within the system in order to have a weight in your vote or your node?
Anyone?
That says electoral colleges in the US are a form of a consensus agreement. That's exactly right, Tate.
And so the proof of stake is that you have that you'll benefit from the decision. Is that?
Sort of. Michael says other people put their own stakes behind them to support them. So exactly, Michael. So what is the stake? What type of merit is your stake when we're dealing with money? It gives them more credibility. But that stake is wealth, right?
Just a little feedback, Nate. You're not supposed to give them the answer in the question.
Well, I must not have, because no one caught it. So remembering a meritocracy is based on your credibility or your relevance to a certain decision. And when we look at a proof of stake system, your merit is based on your wealth, or how much money you contribute to the system, or you have visible in the system. Now, we touched briefly on the concept of delegated proof of stake, where other people who aren't running nodes can stake money to a given node that they believe in or support. So when we look at a delegated proof of stake model, its meritocratic voting system is based on wealth, but it's also based on social influence. Now, another form of on-chain governance is proof of authority. It's kind of a subcategory within proof of stake, where your merit within a proof of authority system is simply based on your social reputation. And when we look at that in the context of nodes validating transactions for a network, your social reputation is going to be your reliability as a node, your ability to perform your duties when you need to, and your lack of negative impact on the system. So when we say social reputation, we have to think about social reputation in the context of what is my role in this system. Now, what constitutes authority may vary from network to network, and what constitutes merit may vary from network to network, but generally, a meritocratic system is based on how you conduct yourself in the network. And in general, this lets us make decisions more efficiently. It lets us also not cast an implied vote. It actually lets us vote on a decision before it happens, which, for one, eliminates most forks. But it also just introduces more efficiency into the technology system. There's less wasted time, there is less disagreement, and that's generally a good thing. Now, the last form of, oh, I forgot I had this slide. So this is basically how meritocracy is, works in a social sense. Helen contributes some work to a project or a cause. She gains the respect from her peers for doing that. That respect gives her voice more weight in discussions. And as a result, she's given the right to participate in a leadership decision. And that could be as an appointed representative or as a pure voting participant in a network. This is a basic construct of a meritocracy. Now, the last form of blockchain governance that's prevalent today is what we call the decentralized autonomous organization, or DAO, as it's frequently called. Now, because of the nature of a blockchain and the ability to conduct governance directly on the blockchain, people realized that they could basically set up a stateless organization, a pseudo-state, if you will, with its own set of jurisdictional regulations and policies run by a governance process. The goal being to govern and maintain and manage a set of rules and policies for a blockchain network, both for the technology itself and for each user and participant in the network, without any tie or connection to any national or bordered jurisdiction. Now, let's look at this flow chart here, because this gives us a pretty good idea of how I'm just going to say DAO from here on out, how a DAO operates. And a decentralized autonomous organization is typically a combination of the supporters of a network. It could be the developers, the nodes, the validators. It could be investors. It could be legal advisors. Anyone who has a stake or a vested interest in the network could very well participate in a decentralized autonomous organization, so long as they have relative merit. So the first thing that typically happens is a DAO has to vote or agree on a budget. And that budget is the amount of money that's available for proposals that get approved through the governance system. That budget funds those approved proposals. Now, typically in a DAO, anyone can submit a proposal for consideration, but the important piece is that it's not free. And the first several DAOs that came into existence, in fact, some that are still in place today, forgot about that last piece. They made submitting a proposal free because they thought, liquid democracy, let's let everyone participate. But what ended up happening was that overloaded the network. We had too many people who did not have the merits, who were basically submitting proposals when they shouldn't. They basically took advantage of being able to participate in a governance system and made it a lot harder for the DAO to function as it was supposed to, because the decisions that were being asked to be made were backlogged by much smaller, much less relevant decisions. So charging a price is an important piece of submitting a proposal, because it ensures that the submitter is going to only do it if it's important, relevant, and if they believe it has a reasonable likelihood of being passed. So once a proposal is submitted, it's screened. Again, we have a set of protocols, of rules that enable the DAO to pretty easily screen these proposals. Once they're screened, the qualified voters vote. And again, here, when we look at a DAO, we talk about there's no delegation. Delegation is essentially forfeiting your voice in the system, or your voting power in the system. Now, once votes are cast, they're weighted, and the decision is made. Again, we have a weighting protocol here. That's another set of the governance rules in the system that are governed by the blockchain. And this is kind of less important to the DAO's process, but the ballot results are secret until the winner is announced, and the proposal gets approved or declined. So this is the basic process how a DAO makes decisions on behalf of a blockchain network or a blockchain platform. Something that's interesting about a DAO is that because we have this liquid form of democracy, there's much less power of authority concentrated in any one person or any one group. Everyone participating in the system has an equal weight or an equal power proportional to their merit and their experience and reputation within the system. So a DAO effectively limits the decision-making process to the people who are relevant to making the decision. And that's a great basis for designing and governing an adaptable piece of software, really. Now, when we look at starting DAOs, we face a challenge. And that's because whenever we start an organization, historically, we did that with a domicile. We set up a company in the United States, probably the place we live. But if we remember, the goal of a DAO is that it is not tied to any one jurisdiction. It's not governed by any one set of borders. But the challenge is, when you're starting a DAO, you have to incorporate it somewhere initially. there aren't the legal processes or legal practices in place to enable something like this to just come into existence without first having a domiciliation in any given country. And you need enough people interested in your platform that will participate in the DAO and that will give it credence and follow its internal legal policies. Now, until there's really a template for how to do this, we're going to have a hard time of making decentralized autonomous organizations popular and widely used. Now, this is something that we do anticipate happening. Legal practices, almost more than any other thing, move extremely slowly. So we are to forward-thinking lawyers who are already tackling this to take steps to make this easier for blockchain platforms. Some of our team, Mark, for example, is working actively to bring together strong minds from all over the world who are looking to make DAOs more viable and more prevalent. But we need these practices and these processes that make this more possible to do, and don't require any jurisdictional home base as a starting point. And that's a big challenge to overcome. That being said, a DAO is really the ideal model for governing any community, whether it's a community using a blockchain or any given culture or group of people. It's a flexible, it's adaptable, it's a dynamic system of creating, enforcing, and modifying regulations and policies. And that's something that hasn't been possible in a secure and immutable way until we have a now
the Kevlar project, one of the core components is in fact going to be a DAO.
Right. And in fact, we're going to actually, Mark, probably cover most of the things we've covered so far when we talk about Kevlar. I have one more challenge question for you guys. If my slides will change. Oops. How would you design a governance system for an ideal global currency? Remember, here are the common forms today that we've seen. Would it follow a representative democracy? Would it be a pure liquid democracy where everyone gets to vote? Would it be meritocratic in some sense? And how would you determine the merit for any given decision? You have to make sure that governance is decentralized, especially if you're claiming to have a decentralized system, which an ideal global currency would, I hope. So what do you guys think? Kevin, you've been quiet. Any ideas here? Some new messages coming in. Where everyone gets an equal vote if they want it. That would be essentially a liquid democracy, Michael. Kevin's still thinking. Okay.
He abdicates. He abdicates. He's out of here.
Did you just see that statement? Oh my God. Wait till we talk about what money is tomorrow.
Monday, but yeah, right.
Monday, sorry. Yeah, next session.
But it has to be decided by whoever's participating, for sure, right?
Right.
That is an ideal, yeah. Do governments get a vote? Separate from the users?
But they're participating. As
There.
so I would say yes.
All right. So
Yep.
Amazon, do companies get a vote?
They're participating.
So Amazon would get a bigger vote than probably 200 of the 280 countries in the world.
Right? They're bigger than India or something like that, right? Like, I don't
I
know.
mean, do you do it wealth-based, or do you just give everyone one vote?
Or a different merit than wealth.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Inversely proportional to your military size? America
What would
gets like a
support?
fraction of a vote. Russia gets a fraction of a vote.
Because why is Alex against global currency, and how does the voting, how does the governance help overcome whatever issues he has with global currency?
What is your opposition, Alex?
Who's got a rooster? I've not heard that one yet.
Mark.
Sorry. Cayman
He has
squirrels.
lots of pets.
Oh, I've heard dogs and stuff. Wow.
Fate, I would say the definition of ideal is that it equally considers and equally serves all of the participants and the users of it, and equitably.
But the definition is what's equally and equitably. Is it wealth?
Exactly.
Is it stake? Or is it?
How do you determine equal treatment, right?
Yeah, I don't know. What's the answer, Nate?
There is no answer.
I know.
Difficult to explain at the moment, but for me, I don't see it in the near future.
For the global currency.
Well, it is a difficult concept, and you're right that it would take a long time for it to become a reality. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a case for it. And like Mark said, we're going to talk lots about that on Monday. So definitely join us on Monday, Alex, because you'll enjoy it.
I just want to know why Alex doesn't believe in the US dollar.
I'm assuming CFA is the Canadian CPA exam or something else? What's CFA, Alex?
I think that's
Global.
Canadian Financial Advisor.
Okay.
It's a financial certification.
Okay, cool. Well, if you join us on Monday, you'll be able to explain much sooner than that, Alex.
And I can't either, Alex, so it's okay. I'm the prof. So we don't have an answer. There's no way to decide.
So there's no way to decide, and there's no way to. Sorry, there's no correct answer here. But I wanted to leave you guys with that to challenge everyone to think about what's possible to influence in our world with blockchain governance. Currency is one of them, but there are also other important social constructs that we all depend on that stand to gain from this new technology. And what you're looking at here, sorry, Karen, is a project called Aragon. And I only share this with you because Aragon is a blockchain project that's all about what they say here, helping decentralized organizations solve the world's worst problems. So Aragon has some really cool initiatives and case studies and applications of how they're using blockchain to influence communities and influence decentralized communities. So if you're curious about this, I definitely recommend checking out Aragon, and I think I can drop the link in here for you in the chat.
Amazing. This is saying that like the design of the technology is, or no, how to leverage the technology of blockchain is really about is really a political issue.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's a political issue. It's a social issue, and the reason it's most interesting is because blockchain governance in general, it's an interesting experiment or an innovation because you're essentially digitizing the ways communities make decisions. And that's something that hasn't been done effectively before. And it's going to take us a long time to get used to that and to even understand what that feels like, probably before we get to lasting solutions. But it's a new paradigm that's definitely going to lead to cool solutions that hopefully come about in not too many years. So that does it for our session today. We're going to go on Monday, talk about economics and currencies and cryptocurrencies. It's definitely going to be an interesting one. So that's it for today. Did anyone have any questions? Anyone want to? Worst problems: food, health.
The virus, maybe?
Yeah, I would group that in with health. But yeah, one, I would say that food, health, pretty much the two big ones.
All right, any other
I would say
questions?
environmental health too. Public health and environmental health. But yeah, any other questions?
Well, I know I'm looking forward to next week, Nate. And as he mentioned, there's the 3 next sessions coming up, as well as Olivia is speaking on May 12th, and Riddy is speaking on May 15th to conclude our series for the semester. And don't forget, though, that we're moving to a new platform for our meetings, Teams, because Blackboard is being re-platformed so it's being turned off this week for a week. All right, so look forward to seeing you guys all next week. Have a great weekend. And let's continue to learn together, man.
Awesome.
Okay,
Thanks,
guys.
Karen, and thanks everyone for joining. We'll see you Monday. I'm always on LinkedIn if you have any questions or ideas over the weekend.
Yeah, because they need to study because your questions are too hard.
Don't forget, Monday you're going to get a homework assignment. So
Okay. And did you see Fate's looking forward to Monday?